part of. Let me now address my questions, and I yield myself 5 minutes, the time that may be called upon to finish my questioning. Because I do want to open with that we are a few days away from crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which reflected the shedding of blood for the right to vote by African Americans and other diverse Americans that ultimately joined Dr. King after Bloody Sunday, where our dear friend, late colleague, John Lewis, shed blood, as others did on that bridge. And I'm always moved by the emotion of that moment, of the shedding of blood for freedom. And so let me say that I don't hold Ms. Nomani or to Mr. Westhill any form of discrimination, nor do I think the members of my Democratic colleagues and members of the Democratic Party as well. We do believe, as John has taught us and Dr. King, in the beloved community. But let me try to set the record straight so that this continued miscalculation and politicalization and campaign rhetoric that has really hurt more than helped can be set. Now, there are many definitions to what we've been discussing, but let me put into the record, I think, a reasoned definition of which, if someone has a rebuttal, they can, when I say rebuttal, they have another definition, the record is open for you to submit it. Critical race theory is a cross-disciplinary intellectual and social movement of civil rights scholars and activists who seek to examine the intersection of race and law in the United States and to challenge mainstream America liberal approaches to racial justice. For example, the CRT conceptual framework is one way to study how and why U.S. courts give more lenient punishments to drug dealers from some races than to drug dealers of other races. The word critical in its name is an academic term that refers to critical thinking, critical theory, and scholarly criticism, rather than criticizing or blaming people. It first arose in the 1970s. The other critical schools of thought, such as critical legal studies, which examine how legal rules protect the status quo. It has nothing to do with teaching anyone in elementary school, middle school, or any place else. It is a scholarly effort to address the question of the intersection of law and race. Any books that have been done that have used it is because the author is unclear, imprecise, and without knowledge about that. Parents certainly have the right to engage with their school districts on what they believe is effective for their students. However, I will not accept the abuse of that term to come before us in this hearing that is talking about the absolute discrimination against people who cannot speak for themselves. So let me just show why this African-American young person had to have his hair cut off so that he could effectively participate in sports. And my friends decided to vote against something called the Crown Act, which means that whatever style hair you have is protected under the Constitution. Maybe you're not familiar with the story of Emmett Till. This is what his mother had to confront, this bloodied and mutilated head of a 14-year-old who went to Mississippi, an African-American, who suffered the indignities of violence. So I think this hearing that talks about discrimination in the civil rights of Muslim, Arab, and South Asian American communities is focused on how discrimination laws have undermined it over the period of their time here in the United States in ways that we can try and fix. We are problem solvers. We are grateful that the courts have responded to perceived discrimination, but in any event, what I would clearly say, and you need to put down your camera, please. You need to put down your camera. You need to put down your camera. It's a, I understand that, but I need the witness.
Why do I have to put down my camera?
Because I'm already on video, so I don't need to be on yours.
I mean, this is free speech.
There's not a rule on that, right?
I've asked respectfully, and you choose not to be respectful, and so I will allow you to continue on. Thank you so very much. But in any event, I believe that this hearing deals with the impact of discrimination on the groups who have suffered discrimination in such a large way. And so I'd like to make sure that we are focused on that. I'm disappointed that CRT has been politicized to attack people who simply want to ensure that our children have an opportunity to be engaged in diversity. I know that this words that I am saying now in the most calm way will be mutilated by the right-wing media. That is all they do. They do not act in truth, and they do not try to provoke truth. They try to provoke people. And we've been so busy trying to step away from that we saw what happened on January 6th, where, as Congressman Raskin said, they came, they beat, they attacked, they called names, and they made a mockery of democracy, and they attacked the citadel of democracy. That is not what we're doing here in this hearing. So may I ask Ms. Berry, the Trump Muslim ban, various other discriminatory aspects that impact the Asian American community, I want to simply ask you the question: what kind of violence has been generated against Asian Americans and Arab Americans in particular, the Muslim ban that you've seen that has come out of the utilization of the Trump Muslim ban, the attack on how some Muslims may be attired, students in school? How is that atmosphere generated, from your perspective, violent acts against Muslim Americans? Ms. Berry?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, we saw a significant surge in hate crimes in our country. One of the key things that we do at the Arab American Institute is try to increase hate crime data collection and reporting. We believe that data drives policy, and it's incredibly important that we have the accurate data on that. After the last year we have FBI hate crime data for is 2020, and it is literally the second highest year post 9/11. So from the 2016 presidential election to today, we have seen a marked increase in anti-hate against pretty much all communities. And we really do believe, while I'm not here to make a direct correlation between speech and hate, but when it emanates from our lawmakers, when it emanates from the presidential pulpit, it has a very real impact on communities and how they're targeted. And if I may, Congresswoman, I would love to take this opportunity because of what we're talking about here today. One of the most important things, Congresswoman Garcia pointed out that she was able to—
Excuse me, just a moment. Madam Chair, since we've gone so far, would you permit me an additional time period to ask?
The ranking member always has an additional time period, and then the chair will close. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Congresswoman Garcia was able to remove her name from a no-fly list because the no-fly list actually has a better redress process than the watch list. And I think that's a pretty extraordinary thing. The watch list, we don't even know the size of it, so you don't know you're on it. There are estimations it could be well over 1 million people. That's a problem. We need to have a better due process practices in place. And then the final point I want to make, because I do think this is a historical hearing. This is important that we're examining 20 years later the rights of Arab Americans and American Muslims and South Asians. And one of the most important things we can do as we reflect on that is to actually address the issue of profiling in a very meaningful way. In 2003, then Attorney General Ashcroft issued profiling guidance that said we will not profile.
Barry, if you can summarize.
Sorry. We will not profile in 2003. Regrettably, those loopholes were so big that we issued new guidance in 2014 saying we will not profile. We continue to have a loophole that exists for national security, border security, and local law enforcement. And until we find a remedy for that, regrettably, the policies that we're talking about here today that impact our communities directly, but I would argue all Americans, they will find their way to all Americans, we need to do better.
Thank you. I'd appreciate it if you would submit in writing why is detailed demographic data about the Arab American community important, and what work has your organization been doing to increase such data collection efforts? If you could submit that in writing, I'd appreciate it.
Happy to do so, thank you.
I'd be interested, just in this follow-up to the Sikh community, and I know of the tragedy that has occurred in the Sikh family and religion in Minnesota, but can you describe some of the Sikh Coalition's findings regarding bullying of Sikh youth, and whether or not that also generates into violence against the Sikh community?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for your question. According to multiple surveys that the Sikh Coalition has taken, Sikh American students experience high rates of bullying and harassment in our nation's public schools, and we continue receiving and documenting nationwide reports of school bullying.
Thank you.
Sikh boys who wear turbans are called terrorists, and girls are teased for having long hair, and many of these children are subjected to violence. Our research shows that the majority of Sikh children, just over 50% of which have endured school bullying. Over 2/3 or 67% reported that they were bullied in school, and turban Sikh children experience bullying at more than double the national rate. We know that it occurs not just on school grounds, but also on buses and increasingly on social media, such as Facebook, Twitter, and anonymous mobile phone apps. And despite the growing recognition of bullying as a national problem, lawmakers and school officials are not collecting comprehensive bullying data, and their enforcement of these anti-bullying policies that exist are completely inconsistent. We also know that Title IV is being used to enforce religious bullying by the Department of Justice. However, religious discrimination is not explicitly investigated by the Department of Education because it's not a protected category under Title VI. So that's an area where bullied kids are left without full access to recourse when they've suffered.
Thank you very much. I appreciate those questions, and we'll have other questions submitted into the record.